everyone, I'm Sinister Tales. Today we've got 8 scary stories from people who bought new houses in Appalachia, thinking they were getting a clean start, and instead ran into something they never saw coming. But before we begin, make sure to like and subscribe. It helps the channel, and you can always change your mind later. And if you've got ideas for the next video, drop them in the comments. I was 33 when I moved into the house on Weaver Hollow Road, just above the old quarry. I bought it sight unseen. Stupid, yeah, but the price was too good, and I needed a few 100 miles between me and my old life. Divorce will do that. The listing said, 2-bedroom, mountain view, some repairs needed. Not one word about how sound behaved in that place. The first week, I focused on making it livable. The previous owners left junk stuffed in the crawl space boxes, bags of who knows what, and there were still canned goods in the cabinets. Everything was sealed and dusty, but fine. I cleaned, swept, tested smoke alarms. Every room had this odd echo, like the walls were thinner than they looked. I blamed the hollow the house sat in. By the second week, the snow deepened. It was so cold, the doorknob stayed icy, even in the afternoon. I started a running repair list on a yellow legal pad, patched a hole in the attic, sealed cracks, drained the basement pipes, and taped the pad to the fridge. Seeing progress in one place helped. The first thing that felt wrong happened on a Monday. That morning, I sealed the latch on the bedroom window. I remember because getting it aligned was a pain. After that, I went out back for firewood, 20 minutes tops. When I came in, the latch was undone. The window was still shut, but the lock I'd just turned was flipped open. I stared at it, doubting myself. Maybe I hadn't locked it all the way. I latched it again, made sure it clicked, and tried to move on. The next morning, something small was off. The stack of firewood by the hearth didn't look right. I always line the logs up neatly, bark out. One had been turned cut end in, bark out. A dumb detail, but it got under my skin. I fixed it and wrote on the pad, check for drafts or critters. Thursday was worse. I walked into the kitchen and saw another list taped beneath mine on the fridge. Same yellow paper, same tape, same basic layout. But the handwriting wasn't mine. It looked like mine if I tried too hard neater, more upright. The items were similar too. Sealed west window, checked cabinet hinge. The phrasing was stiff, like someone copying the shape of my life without understanding it. One line said, verification complete, no fault. I live alone. I pulled it down and sat at the table comparing it to my list. Close, but not quite too precise, the slant wrong. I photographed it, then fed it into the wood stove. The paper curled in the flames and vanished fast, barely smoking. 2 days later, I went back into the crawl space. A pipe clanked every time the heater kicked on, and I thought I could reroute it. When I moved in, I'd measured that space, 12 feet across, tight but manageable. That day, my flashlight didn't find the far end. The beam just thinned into more darkness. I crawled farther than I ever remembered. Way back, I found a gray plastic bin cracked along the lid one I hadn't seen before. Inside were 3 yellow legal pads, identical to mine. Same brand, same everything. Dates were scribbled in the margins. Winter, year before last. The entries started out ordinary, almost like my own notes. Then they got wrong. Return log to surface. Case correction. Host is adapting. I dropped the pad and scrambled out so fast I scraped my elbows raw. Upstairs, I checked every room. Nothing looked disturbed. Nothing missing. I turned on the radio for noise, but it was all static until I set it near the north wall. Then it caught a faint weather station, flat forecasts, and wind chill warnings. That Sunday, the lights flickered around sunrise. Power up there was unreliable, so I stoked the wood stove and boiled coffee on a camp burner. When I came back into the living room, my yellow pad was open to a clean page. Someone had written, "Repairs complete. Continue observation." The handwriting was too uniform, pressed hard, evenly spaced, like it came from a machine trying to pretend it was a person. I tore the page out and buried it in the snow behind the house. I couldn't make myself burn it. After that, it didn't escalate. It shrank, quiet, precise. A drawer would already be open when I walked in, not moving, just open. The hallway felt longer. I used to count 11 steps from the living room to the bedroom. Now it was 13. I counted twice. The radio started looping, 2-minute updates repeating later word for word. Same voice, same timing, like it was faking live. One night, I shut off every light and stood in the middle of the living room, waiting to see how long it took the house to go fully still. I counted to 61. Then, from the far end of the hallway, a single footstep. Not a creak, a step. I didn't move. The next night, the hallway light turned on by itself. I hadn't touched it. That's when I stopped sleeping in the bedroom. I set up a cot in the living room where I could see every doorway. I kept the fire going all night. I pinned the yellow pad inside my coat and stopped writing in it. If something was watching, I wasn't giving it new material. Early January, in the middle of a snowstorm, I went down for one last load of firewood and decided to check the crawl space again. Flashlight in hand, I crawled in and stopped. The back wall had changed. There was a hatch now, vertical wooden planks with a rusty handle. Same boards as the crawl space walls, like it had always belonged there. Nailed to it was a note torn from my yellow pad. Repair complete. Exit. I didn't open the hatch. I pulled the paper off, folded it once, and backed out, leaving the door untouched. That night, I photographed every room from every angle. The next day, I took the film into town, got prints made, and tacked them to the kitchen wall so I could compare outlets, furniture placement, even the shadows beneath doors. One photo stopped me cold. It was the living room window. My reflection was in the glass, except I wasn't holding the camera. My arms hung at my sides. I packed a duffel with essentials. I locked every door. Then I unlocked them all. I left every light blazing. The house was too cheap to be normal. I knew that. I'm not that clueless. I just convinced myself I'd gotten lucky. I was 26, working remote, burned out on city life. A nearly abandoned mountain town in December didn't scare me. It sounded like quiet. The first week was honestly close to perfect: light snow, clear nights. I chopped wood during the day, spent evenings fixing small things. For once, life felt balanced, until the second Friday, just after sunset. I was walking into the bedroom when I noticed something on the inside of the frosted window. A set of concentric circles, 5 of them, perfectly nested. No smears, no drag marks. Clean lines, like someone had etched them with a compass. It didn't make sense. It was warm inside. Frost shouldn't have formed on the inner pane. That meant the design came from outside. I grabbed a flashlight and walked the perimeter. Fresh snow everywhere, no tracks, no scuffed patches, nothing under the window. By morning, the frost was gone. I told myself it was condensation, temperature shift, fatigue. Weird, but harmless. A few days later, I was brushing my teeth when the bathroom lights didn't flicker, they dimmed, dropping to half brightness in a way that made my skin tighten. I stood there, frozen. 2 seconds later, a knock came from under the floor. Sharp, deliberate, like a fist rapping directly beneath my feet. It didn't repeat. I rinsed, dried off, and practiced not thinking. By the weekend, the road to town was nearly buried. I spent half the afternoon shoveling a path. When I came back in, the front door wasn't latched. It stood open about 4 inches. I knew I'd shut it. I double-check everything out there, one loose latch, and the whole house can freeze. I stood outside, breath fogging, staring down the hallway. No movement, no sound, just a heavy wrongness in my chest. I forced myself inside and cleared the place room by room. Nothing. Then I realized what I hadn't checked: the attic. The hatch was in the hallway ceiling with an old stiff pull string. I climbed up with a flashlight. The attic was bare plywood and insulation empty, except for the floor. Footprints covered it. Not boots, bare feet. Dozens of overlapping prints, pale and small, as if someone had been pacing in circles for hours. I couldn't even tell where they started. I climbed down, slammed the hatch, and jammed the hallway broom under it like a wedge. That night, I locked my bedroom door, an old habit I thought I'd outgrown. Around 2:00 a.m., I woke to pressure against it. Not pounding, just steady weight leaning in from the other side. I held my breath. Then a whisper, close and amused. "You locked it this time." I didn't sleep again. At first light, I packed a bag and drove into town. I got a room at the Windmere Motel and told myself I'd sort it out in a few days. At the gas station, the clerk Bari asked where I was staying. When I told him the road, he hesitated. "That little A-frame up past the turnoff." "Yeah." He tapped the counter once, studying me like he was deciding whether to speak. "Stay out of the crawl space." That was the first time it hit me. There might be more under the house than I'd assumed. 4 days later, I drove back. Snow lay mostly untouched, except for a trail coming out of the woods. The tracks weren't right. Not animal, not human. The stride was too long, the angles too sharp, like whatever made them didn't understand how legs worked. They led straight to the back door. I didn't go inside. I stood on the steps, staring, then turned around and drove back to town. The next day, I borrowed a shotgun. That afternoon, I returned and followed the trail around the house. That's when I saw rusted bulkhead doors, half hidden behind a collapsed woodpile. Doors I'd somehow missed. I boiled a kettle, poured hot water over the hinges, and pried the doors open with a crowbar. Concrete steps went down, not a crawl space, but a square room beneath the house. The air smelled like dirt and something older. In the flashlight beam in the corner sat a neat stack of children's clothes folded like someone cared. I put a foot on the top step. From directly below me, one knock. Deliberate. I backed away, slammed the bulkhead shut, bolted it, and walked straight to my car. That night, I stopped pretending. I barricaded doors and windows, shoved the couch against the front door, boarded the back, and slept with the shotgun across my lap. At 3:00 a.m., the lights dimmed again. Then the voice rose clear through the floorboards. "Come see what we saved for you." I didn't pack. I didn't lock up. I walked out, got in my car, and drove until I hit a highway with clear lanes. My shift at the Municipal Records Center started at 6:00, and by the time I walked in, the building already felt too quiet for something that old. I'd only taken the job for the winter, while the regular clerk recovered from surgery. Temporary. Simple. The center sat on the edge of a small Pennsylvania town called Meriton, wedged between the library and an old brick post office. My routine was automatic. Unlock the office, clock in, flick on the overhead lights that hummed a little too loud, then walk the hallway to the archive room. That archive was why the building felt bigger inside than it looked from the street. It ran underground far deeper than you'd expect, 3 full levels lined with shelves of rolled maps, building permits, inspection logs, microfilm. I only needed the first level except on inventory days, which was fine by me. The stairwell echoed in a way that carried too far. The first week was normal. I scanned documents, updated indexes that hadn't been touched since the 90s. On breaks, I watched cars slide through the intersection, tires whispering over old asphalt. Boring, predictable. The first strange thing happened on a Monday evening shift. I was logging sewer line upgrades when the shelving behind me jolted, one solid bump, like someone pushed it from the other side. I spun around too fast and saw nothing. The shelves stayed still. I told myself it was settling old metal, old supports, and kept working. 2 nights later, the layout changed. That hallway had 4 doors, 2 storage closets on the right, the stairwell at the end, and a restricted records room on the left I didn't have clearance for. Coming back from the copy machine, I saw a 5th door narrow, unpainted, wedged between the restricted room and the first storage closet. I stopped, blinking. I'd walked that hall dozens of times. That door had never existed. I tried the knob. Locked. I checked the floor plan binder near the front desk. No 5th door. No notes. No renovation entry. When I returned, the door was still there, blank and dull. By morning, it was gone. I didn't report it. I didn't know how without sounding ridiculous. And in the moment, I managed to convince myself I'd miscounted, that my brain filled in a detail that wasn't real. My second week brought inventory day on the second archive level. I hated going down there. The temperature dropped halfway down the stairs, the air turning thick and stale. The lights buzzed harder, too. Every footstep seemed to travel ahead of me, as if someone else were walking deeper into the aisles, just out of sight. Halfway down one row, I found a roll of surveying maps I didn't recognize. The paper looked newer than everything else. No yellowing, no frayed edges, no label. When I unrolled it, the first thing I saw was the date. 2 years in the future. The drawing showed street expansions for a neighborhood that didn't exist. The handwriting on the markings looked rushed, almost panicked. I checked the incoming logs. Nothing, no additions for months. When I went back to the shelf, the map roll was gone. I knew where I'd set it. The shelf still showed a faint dust line where it had been. I searched every row, every cart, every bin. Nothing. I didn't finish inventory. I went back upstairs, shut the lights off, and left early. Then the building started moving my things. A pen vanished from the front desk and reappeared balanced perfectly on top of the wall clock. A stapler that had been beside the scanner turned up on the 3rd shelf inside the supply closet. I tried to laugh at myself, misplacing things, getting distracted, until whole files began shifting. Labels turned backward, folders out of order, department files swapped where they didn't belong. One night, I found a folder lying on the floor in front of the restricted records room. I never touched that room. My key card didn't open it. The folder's label was in my handwriting. And I'd never seen the folder before in my life. I didn't open it. I picked it up, set it on a desk, and backed away from it like it was alive. That same night, I heard footsteps on the second level, same floor as me. Slow, uneven steps moving between rows. I stood still, waiting for the sound to resolve into something normal, a door creak, a coworker, anything. It stopped mid-stride, not fading, just off, like someone cut the noise. When I locked up, my hands shook so badly I fumbled the keys twice. By week 3, I stopped going downstairs alone. I kept the stairwell locked unless I had no choice. Even then, I left upstairs lights on and kept my phone in my pocket with the flashlight ready. It wasn't movie terror. It was the feeling of my body recognizing danger before my mind could justify it. The worst moment came on a Thursday night when I was the only employee scheduled. I was scanning old utility permits when the power dipped a sharp flicker, like the building inhaled. When the light steadied, the restricted records door was open a crack. I knew it had been closed and locked. I stepped toward it, slow, every muscle braced. The hallway felt colder than it should have, my breath too loud. I pushed the door wider with one finger, dark shelves, still air. Then a soft scrape, like paper sliding across wood. I froze. When it didn't repeat, I shut the door and locked it hard. The click echoed louder than it had any right to. I considered leaving, but documents still sat on the scanner, and I didn't want to explain unfinished work. So I stayed, eyes fixed anywhere but the hallway, until the last page finished. When I grabbed my coat, the 5th door was back. Same spot, same unpainted surface. This time the knob turned. I didn't want to, but my hand moved anyway, slow, unreal. I opened it a few inches. Behind it was a narrow stairwell with concrete steps dropping beyond the reach of the overhead light. Cold air rolled up, smelling like wet cardboard and something metallic. I closed the door, locked it, backed away. 5 minutes later, when I passed again, the door was gone. I left without finishing my logs. My pulse didn't settle until I reached my car. The next day, I told the supervisor I was sick. The day after that, too. On the 3rd day, I left my badge and keys in an envelope without explanation. I took another temp job in another town and never walked past the record center again. I moved into a small rental on the edge of Brandon, Virginia, practically hugging the Kentucky line. 1 bedroom, slanted roof, warped porch steps, a stove that always made a strange double click before it lit. The floor creaked like it had things to hide, and the coat closet carried a faint, sour smell that Febres couldn't touch. The rent was low enough that I didn't push for answers. I moved in December 1st. The first week was mostly just cold. Winter arrived early and didn't bother waiting for the calendar. Snow fell the second night. I remember sitting at the tiny kitchen table, watching it drift past the window, and thinking the silence outside was too complete, no neighbors, No traffic, just blank stillness. The power cut out once around day 3, only an hour, but it made me dig out a camping flashlight and leave it by the bed. The house also hated holding a signal. My phone stayed on no service unless I stood beside the bathroom window, where I could coax one shaky bar if I held it just right. Then came December 8th, around 9:00 p.m. The internet died completely after days of sputtering. I reset the modem, waited, plugged it back in, nothing. My phone had no service either. I stared at the dead icons, gave up, and decided a shower might reset my brain. Hot water lasted maybe 3 minutes before it turned to ice. I rinsed my hair as fast as I could, stepped out shivering, muttering under my breath, and saw the oven light glowing amber in an otherwise dark kitchen. I hadn't used the oven. I hadn't touched the stove since breakfast. All the knobs were off. I stood there trying to decide whether I was just exhausted and inventing drama. Eventually, I flipped the breaker in the hallway. When I came back, the oven light was still on. I wanted to care more than I did, but the cold shower had drained me. I told myself it was wiring, made a note to text the landlord in the morning, and went to bed. At 2:00 a.m., I woke up for no reason. The flashlight on my nightstand was on, beam steady at the ceiling, like someone had switched it on and set it down gently. I sat up and stared. Maybe I'd bumped it, except it was a hard plastic lantern with a stiff switch you had to press. You don't roll onto it by accident. I turned it off and walked the house. Front door locked, back door locked. Nothing moved, nothing out of place. I made tea because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The moment I flipped the kettle switch, the flashlight turned on behind me. I froze, watching the shadow crawl across the cabinets. The beam angle looked identical still on the nightstand. I turned it off again, shoved it into a kitchen drawer, and sat up the rest of the night waiting for something else to happen. In the morning, I emailed the landlord, casually asking if anyone had mentioned electrical issues. No response. I followed up the next day. Still nothing. That afternoon, I went into town and used the library internet to dig a little. The property history showed 4 owners in 8 years. It didn't sit right, but I didn't know what to do with it. I bought groceries, drove back, and told myself old houses do weird things. That night, the flashlight stayed in the drawer. At 4:00 a.m., the bathroom fan clicked on by itself, loud, rattling, like someone flipped the switch and walked away. I didn't move. I just lay there, heart sprinting, staring at the wall. 5 minutes later, it shut off. I'd counted every second. The next day, the temperature dropped hard. The kitchen pipes started banging like someone was hitting them with a hammer. I nearly decided to sleep in my car, but snow started up again, and freezing in a vehicle didn't feel safer. One more night, I told myself. Around 11:00 p.m., I stood in the kitchen eating a sandwich when I saw a light drifting through the trees behind the house. At first, I thought headlights, but the road didn't reach that far. I would have heard a car. There were no tire tracks in the snow. The light paused, then moved again, slow, wide sweeps, like someone walking with a lantern and swinging it gently. I killed the house lights and watched from the dark. The light swayed once more. I reached for my phone, no signal. When I looked back, it was gone. I didn't sleep. I sat on the bed in my coat, flashlight in one hand, kitchen knife in the other, waiting. Nothing happened. But in the morning, everything in the fridge was warm. The power hadn't gone out, lights were on. The microwave clock still ran. Only the fridge was compromised, like someone had stood there with the door open for hours. That night, the heat quit. I wore 3 sweaters under a blanket and waited for morning. At some point, I drifted off without remembering it. I woke to the sound of the back door opening, not slamming, not forced, just slowly, carefully. I held my breath. It closed just as gently. Then footsteps, 3 soft creaks across the floor. I lifted the flashlight but didn't turn it on. Another creak, then a dragging sound, something heavy pulled across tile. I clicked the flashlight on. Nothing. I stepped into the hallway, careful, listening. It was empty. The back door was locked like it always was. But the air was wrong, sharper, colder, like it wanted to cut. Then I heard my name, once soft, almost an exhale. I didn't wait. I ran into the bedroom, slammed the door, jammed a chair under the handle, and stayed there until sunrise. By 10:00 a.m., I'd packed everything that fit in my car: clothes, laptop, groceries, flashlight. I didn't lock the house. I didn't leave a note. I left. In a motel in Dunley, I sat on the bed and emailed the landlord from my phone. I was terminating the lease and leaving the key under the mat. I was 32 when I bought the place 3 miles past the town nobody really mentioned anymore, Lauren Hollow. What was left of it was mostly husks. Past the last crumbling building, the road narrowed and dipped into forest, and the quiet there clung to you. I found the property online, bank-owned. No photos past the front porch. The price was ridiculous, laughable. The land alone should have cost more, but no one local seemed to want it. Unpaid taxes, abandoned utilities. The house looked like it hadn't seen people in years, paint peeling, mailbox hanging by one screw, but the frame felt solid. The foundation wasn't cracked. The roof looked newer. No obvious leaks. It was enough for where I was in life. I didn't need a dream home. I needed something that was mine. Something I could fix with my hands, somewhere quiet. I moved in early November, spent days cleaning, patching, unpacking. The place smelled like dust and old wood, not rotten, just long unused. No mold, no rot. Just silence, real silence. No neighbors close enough to shout at, and I liked that. Snow came earlier than I expected. Not a blizzard, just a steady dusting that sugared the trees and made the roof look freshly washed. I remember standing on the front step the first snowy morning and inhaling. The quiet felt artificial, like someone muted the world. On the 9th day, the first sign appeared. I'd made coffee, wandered past the back door a handful of times. Around lunch, I noticed something on the step outside. I opened the door and found bare footprints. Not boots, not shoes. Bare feet narrow and long, longer than mine, high arches, toes angling slightly inward. They weren't running prints. They were calm, evenly spaced, like someone walked up to my back door and stopped. And that was it. No trail away. Nothing leading back into the woods. Just a short, clean approach that ended as if the person had vanished. I stood there trying to force a normal explanation, melting, runoff, some trick of water, but the shapes were too crisp. I could see the ball of the foot, the toes. No smears, no dragging. I grabbed a flashlight and circled the house slowly, scanning for anything, another print, a snapped twig, a broken branch. Nothing, just snow and stillness. That night, I left the hallway light on and put my boots by the bed. Not panic, more like a quiet sense that something hadn't finished. In the morning, the prints were back. Same spot, same spacing. I'd shoveled the steps down to bare wood the night before, but there they were again, perfectly placed. I threw the door open fast, half expecting to catch someone messing with me. The yard was empty. No fresh snowfall. No other tracks leading away. On the 3rd day, I called the county sheriff. The man I spoke with, Deputy Marsh, sounded skeptical, but not cruel. They were short-staffed. Roads were bad. He asked if I had enemies, grudges, squatters. I didn't. He suggested pranksters, animals. I told him about the clean approach and the total lack of exit trail. He went quiet, then told me to keep a weapon nearby and call again if I saw someone in the act. That night, I stayed up with the lights off, watching the yard through a curtain cracked an inch. Around 2:00 a.m., the back step creaked once, just a single shift of weight. I didn't move. I listened. 10 minutes later, I got up, flashlight ready, crossed the kitchen, and yanked the back door open. Nothing moonlight on untouched snow, except the footprints. Same bare feet, same angle, ending at the door like punctuation. The next day, I nailed plywood across the back door, quick, temporary. Then I drove into Oakbury and bought cheap battery security cameras, mounted them at both doors, checked batteries, aimed them carefully. That night, I watched the live feeds on my laptop. Around midnight, the back camera didn't disconnect, it glitched, scrambling like something too close was interfering. Then I heard pressure against the plywood. Not banging, not rattling, just slow weight leaning in, as if whatever was outside wanted to feel the barrier rather than break it. The static lasted 5 minutes. Then the feed snapped back, empty yard. In the morning, the plywood was still tight, nails unmoved. But in the snow, a fresh set of prints, same feet, same size facing the door. Still no trail away. I watched the footage again and again. Nothing, only the glitch and the return to normal. After that, I stopped going outside, stopped checking the snow. I already knew what I'd see. The prince came every night. Shoveling didn't matter. On the 13th night, I sat in the living room with the lights off, not even pretending to sleep. Around 1:00 a.m., I heard something new. A tap soft on the wall near the bathroom. One knock, then another. Not rhythmic, not pleading, just there. That wall backed onto the crawl space. I hadn't touched it since moving in. It was sealed, insulated, unused. When daylight came, I grabbed a hammer and pried open the vent hatch. I crawled in on my stomach with a flashlight. The dirt near the front was frozen, but farther back it was dry. I moved slowly toward the bathroom. That's when I saw something half tucked into the insulation. I pulled it free. A child's shoe. Soft leather, old-fashioned. The kind you'd see in a black and white photo, except it wasn't dry. It was damp and warm, like it had been worn minutes ago. I dropped it and crawled backward without thinking, not looking back. That evening, I packed what mattered: tools, laptop, clothes, batteries, and left everything else. I crossed the county line just after 11 and didn't stop until I reached a motel outside Baylock. I'd just bought my first house, and that alone felt unreal. After years of scraping by, one-bedroom rentals, broken appliances, noisy neighbors, I'd signed a deed. The place wasn't much. Small, sloped, leaning a little like it was ashamed to still be standing. But it was mine. It sat on the edge of a frozen ridge in southern Appalachia, in the kind of region where people still left keys in the ignition and grocery stores closed at 6:00. Long empty roads, pine patches, rusting trailers, forgotten churches. Quiet, almost too quiet. The house had been empty 5, maybe 6 years. Some distant relative inherited it and let it rot in place. But the roof held, the pipes ran clean, and I didn't see obvious decay. The porch sagged, but that felt like age, not ruin. It was January, cold enough to glue your breath to your teeth, but the place held heat better than I expected. The weekend I moved in, snow came down hard. I stayed indoors, unpacking, checking the fuse box, scrubbing dust from corners. I didn't step outside until Monday when I ran out of groceries and drove into Langley, the nearest town with a real store. When I returned, I saw them. Footprints in the snow, bare feet, wide impressions, long toes clearly visible, no shoes, no socks. And they circled the house twice in a clean ring. I stood there holding grocery bags and just stared. The prints looped around in a wide, even circle, then stopped beneath the kitchen window, right below the sink. No tracks led away. No broken trail. Just the loop and the dead end, as if whoever made them vanished. I walked the perimeter twice, boots crunching, checked the crawl space under the porch with a flashlight, even climbed onto the back deck to scan the woods. Nothing. That night, I tried to reason it out, kids maybe, though I hadn't seen a kid since arriving. A hunter, but who walks barefoot through 6 inches of snow. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself plenty. I didn't sleep. Every creak in the siding was too loud. The wind through the trees sounded like it wanted to peel the roof off. Branches scraped the gutters just enough to keep me tense. After 2:00 a.m., I heard 3 soft knocks on the back wall. Not loud, barely more than taps, but distinct. 1, 2, 3, then nothing. I sat up with my phone clutched in both hands and didn't move. Eventually, I fell asleep sitting upright. In the morning, there were new prints. This time, they came in a straight line from the tree line across the backyard to the back wall, then stopped. No return trail, just a clean approach ending in nothing. I called the sheriff. He showed up mid-morning, Clary. Mid-40s, scruffy, friendly enough, wearing camo and a bright orange beanie, which apparently counted as uniform. He crouched by the prints and traced a finger through the snow. Barefoot, he said. I nodded. They came from the woods. There's no trail away. Clary stared at the house. Probably some nutcase up the ridge. We've got a few. I waited for more. Lock your doors every night, he said, as if that solved it, and left. No report. No follow-up. That night, I dragged a chair to the back window facing the shed. I didn't have curtains yet, just plain glass. I sat in the dark and watched. At exactly 10:04 p.m., the motion light over the shed clicked on. I stood. Something passed through the edge of the beam, slow, smooth, not fast enough to be a deer, not shaped quite like a person either. It looked like it glided. I pressed my face to the cold glass, trying to see, and heard the knocks again. 3 soft taps, same wall, same rhythm. I didn't turn on lights. I didn't open a door. I stood frozen, counting seconds while my heart hammered. Minutes later, the motion light shut off. I stayed up until daylight. In the morning, I opened the front door and froze. The prints were there again, bare feet, except now they were inside the porch, captured in the thin slush beneath the overhang. Step after step came through the screen door right up to my front door. Then they stopped. No scuffs on the lock, no scratch marks, no sign of entry, no exit trail. That afternoon, I bought a full camera system, 2 aimed at the porch, 1 on the back wall, 1 in the hallway, just in case. It took hours to mount and sync. That night, I stayed away from the windows and watched the feeds on my phone. Nothing. No knocks, no motion lights, just long silence. In the morning, I checked the recordings. All 4 cameras had glitched. The back wall feed froze at 12:42 a.m. The porch cams froze 6 seconds later. The hallway camera recorded nothing except one single frame at 12:54. A still shot of the dark hallway, no sound, no movement, except at the far end near the utility closet. There was a shape. Hard to make out, but undeniably there. The head was tilted too far to one side, like the neck wasn't right. One arm seemed to end at the elbow. The shoulder on that side sat too high. The closet had no windows. I didn't open that door for 2 days. When I finally did, I brought a crowbar, not because I thought it would help, but because it felt better than empty hands. The closet was empty except for the vent. The floor vent cover had been pried loose, not torn, not smashed, bent inward neatly, like someone had opened it from below. I called Clary again. He took longer this time and looked exhausted when he arrived. I showed him the footage, the closet, the vent. He stared for a while, then asked, "You ever hear about crawl tunnels?" I shook my head. "Old miners dug them under this ridge," he said. "Shortcuts. Some go for miles. Most collapsed years ago." He didn't finish whatever came next. That night, I packed a bag and left. I was 32 when I left Chicago and moved into a house near Mercer, West Virginia. After my dad died, he left me enough money to choose a different life, not a fortune, but enough to step away. So I quit my job, civil engineering, mostly city infrastructure, and got out. I'd lived in cities my whole life, surrounded by people and noise and schedules. I told myself a year alone would clear my head. I figured I'd fix the place up, maybe flip it later. But really, I just wanted to disappear for a while. The house had been vacant a few years. Bank-owned, foreclosure, probate. I didn't ask too hard. The price was low enough to make me wary, but everything checked out. No mold, no foundation issues, no history that popped up in a quick search. I walked it twice, paid cash, and moved in the first week of December. Winter hit hard immediately. The first night, the well pump froze. I didn't even know that could happen. No water, no heat, and the cold there wasn't like the city. It felt heavier, quieter. I hauled buckets from a spigot behind the garage, just to flush the toilet. The next morning, I drove to Bluefield for insulation sleeves, foam wrap, and a small heater for the pump house. Not how I pictured week 1, but I handled it. The day after that, my boots vanished. I'd left them on the back porch, muddy from working in the pump shed. When I stepped out to grab them, they were gone. I searched the garage, the yard, nothing. 20 minutes later, I found them at the edge of the woods. Both boots were soaked, laces tied tight, placed perfectly side by side in the snow like someone had stepped out of them and walked away barefoot. I stood there staring until my eyes hurt, trying to force the idea of raccoons or some normal explanation into place. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't know anyone there, and I didn't want to sound paranoid. 2 nights later, I went to check the pump house and found the door hanging open. I'd installed a bolt latch after the freeze, nothing fancy, just enough to keep animals out. Now it was bent, not snapped. Bent outward as if something flat had forced it open. I stood in the cold with my flashlight pointed into the empty shed and felt that crawling, watched feeling, except there was nothing I could see. That night, around 1:00 a.m., the porch boards creaked, just one subtle weight shift. I lay still. My bedroom faced the back, but I couldn't see the porch from inside. A minute passed, then a faint scrape along the siding beneath my window, short and sharp, like fingernails or a twig dragged once. I didn't sleep. In the morning, footprints crossed the snow bare feet, small and narrow, definitely human. They came from the woods, crossed the porch, and ended at the wall directly beneath my bedroom window. No return trail, no smudging, just a perfect line that stopped at the house. I followed the line back toward the woods, feeling foolish and exposed. About 30 feet down the hill, I found a scrap of fabric snagged on a low branch, red flannel. Ordinary, which somehow made it worse. After that, nothing. No more prints, just trees. I stayed inside all day. That evening, someone knocked on my door. I almost didn't answer, but through the peephole, I saw an older man in a heavy brown coat, holding a thermos like he'd been walking for a while. He introduced himself as Dale, said he lived about a mile down the road, and had noticed lights in the house for the first time in years. He wanted to say hello. He wasn't threatening, quiet, polite in that older country way. I let him in. He didn't comment on anything strange about the place. When I offered coffee, he declined and kept his coat on. That stuck with me. "You got this place cheap, huh?" he asked. "Yeah," he nodded once. "Makes sense." When I told him about the boots and the bent latch, he paused just a fraction, then spoke flatly. "Don't go out after dark, and don't open the door unless you know exactly who's knocking." I asked why. "There's someone that doesn't belong out here," he said. He refused coffee again and left. That night I locked everything, checked it twice, pulled the curtains tight, and kept my phone and flashlight by the bed. At 3:00 a.m., I heard 3 taps at the bathroom window, quick, light, like fingernails or a key. I froze, flashlight already in hand. Then I heard a whisper against the glass, not words, just breath and motion, close enough to fog it. I didn't move until dawn. Outside, there were no footprints in the snow. Nothing. I drove into town and bought good security cameras, one over the porch, one on the driveway, one on the back wall aimed at the woods. I set motion alerts to my phone and watched the live feeds at night. For 5 nights, nothing. On the 6th, just after midnight. The back camera feed went black, not dead, just black, like something covered the lens. I switched to the porch camera and saw him. He stood there barefoot, no coat, thin and pale, head tilted slightly like he was listening to the house. He didn't move for almost 3 minutes. I sat on the couch in the dark, staring at the screen, unable to make my body do anything else. Then, slowly, he turned and walked out of frame. In the morning, the back camera was cracked clean down the middle, like something struck it dead center, not shattered, just split. I emailed the company that sold me the property, asking if anyone had reported issues. They said they didn't keep records like that and suggested I check county archives. So I did. 4 owners in 20 years. 3 stayed less than 12 months. 1 died 7 years ago in January. They found him out back, frozen to death. Barefoot, no coat, like he'd wandered out and forgotten how to come home. That night, I didn't sleep. The next day, Dale came back. He didn't knock. He stood at the edge of the yard and waited. When I opened the door, he motioned me outside. He kept his voice low. "He's still coming around," I nodded. "You need to go," Dale said. "Doesn't matter how strong your locks are. He'll get in eventually. Just go." That night, I checked into a motel in town. I slept badly, but at least the walls didn't creak like they were thinking. When I returned the next morning to pack, the front door was wide open. Every light in the house was on. My phone was dead. Every camera was gone, ripped out of the siding, cables dangling. There were wet, barefoot prints inside. They began at the door and ended in the middle of the living room. No trail in, no trail out, just a spreading puddle where they stopped. I packed what fit in my car and left within the hour. Now, I rent a 1-bedroom in Charleston. I was 33 when we moved into a place near Carden Hollow, tucked into hills, past a half-hidden turnoff most people miss unless they're looking for it. Jules, my partner, heard about the house through an old college classmate. It was a sagging white farmhouse with a red metal roof that pinged when the morning warmed it. A barn leaned off to the right, barely holding itself together. Bare trees wrapped the clearing in a tight ring like a crowd. The gravel drive climbed steep and turned mostly to dirt before the top. It leveled just enough for a turnaround and then ended. No neighbors, no mailboxes, just us and the trees. Nothing about the house was modern. The stairs creaked like complaints. The windows rattled whenever the wind pressed in. But I worked remotely, and Jules was between jobs, so the isolation felt like a gift. The nearest gas station was 15 minutes downhill. Groceries were another 25 past that into Caulfield. I didn't mind driving. We got it cheap, too cheap. The seller was polite, but cagey. He said the previous owner had died suddenly, and the place sat vacant. When we asked for more, he shrugged and muttered something about privacy. We assumed it was a heart thing, a family thing. People don't like talking about death. The first week was quiet. Cold, but quiet. We cleaned, sorted the shed, figured out which outlets worked, and which ones sparked if you tried to run the toaster. Normal old house headaches. The first weird thing I noticed was the snow near the woods. On the second night, I was rinsing dishes and looked out past the barn. The snow was disturbed in the same spot, like something stepped out from the trees, walked a few yards, and then stopped existing. The prints were too wide to be mine, too clean, too deep. Not boot drags, not animal tracks, at least not any I recognized. I told myself it was runoff, or deer, or both. A few days later, I started carrying trash to the shed behind the barn. Pickup service wasn't sorted yet, so I kept sealed bins out there. I'd go after work, usually after dark. The shed's motion light flickered like it was nervous, but it worked at first. Then it began turning on by itself. I'd be inside doing dishes or getting ready for bed and see the pale glow through the kitchen window. I'd look out expecting an animal, a deer, anything. Nothing. Just light spilling on snow. One night after a fresh fall, I walked out with 2 trash bags. The motion light snapped on, and there were already prints in the snow. Deep ones, narrower than boots, longer than my feet, leading from the shed toward the house. I didn't investigate. I dropped the bags and hurried back inside. I didn't even close the shed door. I still didn't tell Jules. Not that night. Right after Christmas, a storm dumped nearly 2 feet overnight. The next morning, I went out with a shovel to clear a path to the truck. That's when I saw the tracks again, except this time, they didn't lead anywhere. They wrapped around the entire house in one unbroken line, right against the siding, looping like something had paced us for hours. I stared for a full minute, then shoveled until every mark disappeared, as if covering them could erase what they meant. A few days later, I took a walk along a narrow trail just beyond our property, probably hunters, maybe hikers. I followed it 10 minutes to clear my head and found a small clearing in the trees, maybe 20 feet wide. In the center sat a rusted fire pit circled by old stones. Behind it, a single wooden chair faced the pit like it had been waiting. The nearest tree was covered in carvings, dozens of slashes and notches. Not words, not symbols, just uneven tally marks, like someone had been counting and lost track. I felt wrong standing there. Not fear exactly, more like trespassing on something that didn't want me to understand it. I turned around without touching anything and never went back down that trail. Just before New Year's, the power went out. The temperature dropped into the low teens. We bundled up, built a fire, and piled blankets. Around midnight, I heard a sound outside. Not steps, not branches snapping, humming flat, slow, off-key, like someone trying to recall a song they hated. It moved around the house. I could tell by the way it faded from one side and rose again on another, circling. I woke Jules and told them to listen. They heard nothing. Even when I begged them to stay quiet and focus, they insisted they couldn't hear it at all. In the morning, everything looked normal, no tracks, no marks, just the same winter quiet. But the tune stuck in my head like it had lodged under skin. Then the crying started, always around the same time, just before bed, high-pitched, long, drawn out, somewhere between a child and a fox. I told myself it was wildlife, that cold air makes sound travel strangely, but it came closer. One night, as we climbed into bed, it sounded from right outside the bedroom window. Same pitch, same cadence, but wrong, like a recording played through cheap speakers. Jules went rigid. That's not a coyote. I grabbed the flashlight, cracked the window just enough to shine the beam out. Nothing, no movement. The sound cut off. As I leaned out to close the window, the beam caught something directly below on the snow. A single footprint, boot-shaped, perfect. Toes pointed straight at the house. It wasn't mine. Was it Jules' S? No, just one print, with no others leading to it. No approach, no departure, just a lone, perfect step aimed at us like an answer. We were packed within 2 days and gone by the weekend.